Rustwater Alley smelled of damp asphalt and overflowing dumpsters. Leo had Caleb pinned against a graffiti-scarred brick wall, the rough surface scraping against the back of Caleb's thin t-shirt. Caleb's eyes, a startlingly clear blue, were wide and red-rimmed, a shimmer of moisture clinging to his lashes, though none had fallen yet. He maintained a stubborn facade of composure. Leo repeated the usual terms of their grim transaction. A 5-minute kiss was the price of passage. He leaned in, roughly claiming Caleb's lips, feeling the tremor that ran through the other boy's slender frame. He watched Caleb's practiced calm begin to fracture, crumbling like a water-damaged photograph. Caleb finally spoke, his voice low and exhausted, asking to be let go today, promising retribution tomorrow. He tried to shove Leo away and make a break for it, but Leo's grip was iron. It was a pathetic reality of their world that a high-tier Omega, stripped of his family's protection, became prey for everyone, even a bottom-feeder alpha like Leo. To prove the point, Leo let a sliver of his own pheromones bleed into the air, the acrid scent of cheap whiskey and old motor oil. Caleb's limbs went slack, his body fighting a battle his willpower couldn't win. In the struggle, the collar of his shirt slipped, revealing a constellation of dark, ugly bruises across his collarbone. Leo's eyes fixed on the marks, and an instinct he didn't understand made him grab Caleb's neck, turning his head to inspect the gland. It was pristine, untouched. A wave of possessive relief washed over him. He lowered his mouth to Caleb's throat, his hand moving to the heated skin on the nape of his neck, ready to leave a temporary mark. Realizing his intent, Caleb began to fight in earnest, a desperate, thrashing struggle. The tears he'd been holding back finally broke free, streaming down his pale cheeks. His voice was a ragged whisper, telling Leo he wouldn't beg him to stop. Then the world tilted. The cool, clean scent of ozone and fresh rain, a fragrance that could cut through the alley's grime, suddenly bloomed with an impossible intensity. It was Caleb's pheromone, high purity and overwhelming, flooding Leo's senses. His sanity evaporated. During an A-class Omega's heat, an E-class Alpha was nothing more than an animal on a leash. Caleb knew this. He was always so careful, loaded with inhibitors and barrier patches. He gasped that they had taken his backpack, then pleaded with Leo to get away from him. His body racked with a discomfort that was rapidly escalating into agony. Caleb collapsed, his breathing shallow and rapid, his eyes glassy. But the agony was mirrored in Leo, magnified tenfold. The pull was a fatal, primal thing, a chemical firestorm in his blood. It was a compulsion to tear, to claim, to possess. Caleb, with a final burst of energy, kicked off a shoe and threw it feebly at Leo's chest. It was a gesture so weak it was almost comical. Leo's hand went to his pocket, pulling out a small box cutter. The sight of the glinting blade froze Caleb, his tear-streaked face a mask of absolute despair that only amplified his fragile beauty. This boy was not his to break. He never had been. The box cutter clattered to the wet pavement. A wave of pressure, like descending into the deep ocean, slammed into Leo, rooting him to the spot. A powerful pheromone he'd never encountered, smelling of crisp pine and cold steel, saturated the air. A figure moved swiftly out of the shadows, gathering Caleb's limp form into a protective embrace. Leo forced his head to turn, his muscles screaming in protest. It was Ryan, Caleb's brother, who had vanished 3 years ago. He was supposed to be a beta, but no beta could emit a scent so terrifyingly dominant it could paralyze an alpha with a thought. Ryan's furious gaze met Leo's. He gently laid Caleb aside before turning back, his movements economical and brutal. A kick sent Leo sprawling, and a fist to the stomach stole his breath. Ryan hauled him up by his collar, his voice a low growl, demanding to know if Leo was responsible for his brother's state. Leo just offered a blood-flecked, fearless grin in response. Ryan's knuckles whitened as he drew his fist back again, but Caleb's weak voice stopped him. He begged his brother to take him home. his body trembling with the fever of his heat. Ryan promised he would be back for Leo, a chilling threat hanging in the air as he lifted Caleb and disappeared into the night. Fear was a luxury for creatures who had something to lose. Wiping the blood from his mouth, Leo staggered to his feet, his head spinning from the dual assault of high-grade pheromones. He hadn't made it 2 steps before a group of figures detached themselves from the deeper shadows. Jax, the unofficial king of Rustwater Alley's delinquents, stepped forward. He remarked on Ryan's sudden reappearance, questioning how he got back from the remote Alaskan disciplinary program he'd been sent to. Then, his lips twisted into a smirk. He reminded Leo of their arrangement. If Leo couldn't finally claim Caleb, he would belong to the rest of them. Jax was a brute who only understood force. The moment Ryan had been shipped off, he had set his sights on the now unprotected Caleb. Leo had stumbled upon the first attempt, finding Caleb cornered by Jax and his cronies, the air thick with the stench of cheap drugs and predatory intent. The memory of Caleb once offering him a sandwich on his first day in the alley, a small, ridiculous act of kindness, had sparked an equally ridiculous flicker of compassion. He'd stepped in, telling Jax he'd had his eye on Caleb for a while. Leo's reputation in Rustwater Alley wasn't built on strength, but on a terrifying lack of self-preservation. He fought like a cornered animal and everyone knew it. Jax had backed down then, and Caleb had become Leo's understood territory. But Leo's long-term inaction had made the pack restless. He told Jax that Caleb was no longer his concern. They could do as they pleased. As he limped away, a strange sense of relief washed over him. Caleb had a protector now, a better one than he could ever be. Back in his cramped, squalid apartment, the purple bloom of the bruise on his stomach was a stark reminder of Ryan's viciousness. His father, Hal, stumbled and drunk, saw the injury, and hurled an empty bottle that shattered against the wall. He slurred accusations about Leo always fighting instead of earning, suggesting he might as well sell his body for cash. Leo ignored him, tending to his wounds before wrestling his father onto the lumpy sofa, where he passed out. The next week was quiet. Caleb didn't show up for school, and neither did Jax or his crew. Rumors started to trickle through the alley. Jax's crew had all been found, beaten and broken. Jax himself had his gland surgically removed. Then came the bigger news. Ryan, the cast-off illegitimate son, had undergone a rare second differentiation in that Alaskan hellhole, emerging as an S-class enigma. He was no longer an outcast but the family's new heir apparent. The attacks had been his revenge, and he had saved the main culprit for last. Leo knew he was being toyed with, left to stew in fear. He refused to give him the satisfaction. A week later, Ryan was waiting for him in a desolate underpass, leaning against the concrete wall, a ball cap pulled low. Leo tried to walk past, feigning indifference, but a vice grip of pure mental force clamped down on him, forcing him to his knees. The overwhelming scent of pine and steel was so thick it was hard to breathe. Ryan used the toe of his boot to tilt Leo's chin up, studying him for a moment before squatting down to his level. He wanted to know the extent of Leo's transgressions, his voice chillingly calm as he inquired about every place Leo's hands had been. Leo silently channeled his rage into a single punch, which Ryan intercepted with insulting ease. The power gap between them was not a gap. It was a chasm. Ryan twisted his arm, grinding his face against the rough concrete until he could taste blood and grit. Ryan leaned in, repeating his question. Looking at the cold fury in his eyes, Leo was struck by a reckless, self-destructive impulse. He lunged forward, pushing into Ryan's space, burying his face in his neck and inhaling greedily. He told Ryan he smelled better than his brother, that he would kiss him instead. The reaction was immediate and violent. A sharp, cracking sound echoed in the underpass as Ryan broke his hand. A scream tore from Leo's throat, tears of pure agony blurring his vision. Ryan hauled him up, his eyes a brewing storm. He snarled that Leo liked to play games of force, and now he would play one with him. He crushed Leo's lips in a punishing kiss, his voice like ice as he said he didn't like how hard Leo's mouth was, wondering how he could have been so soft with Caleb. The statement was so absurdly wrong that Leo started laughing, a raw, broken sound. He was an E-class alpha. He had nothing to fear because he had nothing left to lose. He pushed forward again, but Ryan shoved him away, his gaze dropping lower. Ryan admired his momentary look of frozen horror before his lips curled into a slight smile, asking why he had stopped laughing. Leo was thrown into a corner, once again enveloped by that suffocating pheromone. Ryan's footsteps approached slowly. Leo, feeling the last of his bravado drain away, told him to hurry it up. A hand rested on his head, pressing down with a force that was not immense but was utterly irresistible. Hatred coiled in his gut. Ryan seemed to sense it, acknowledging that Leo wasn't afraid to die, but that there were countless ways to make life a living hell. He advised him to be obedient. He was right. Against this kind of absolute power, trash like him could only endure. He looked up, meeting Ryan's gaze, and offered his only defense. He wasn't sorry for what he did to Caleb. Without him, someone else would have done far worse. To his surprise, Ryan almost immediately agreed. But he added that if his brother was hurt, someone had to be held responsible. He called Leo's disgusting methods a poor excuse for protection, telling him that sometimes weakness itself was a sin. Leo's world tilted. His self-righteous justification, the one thing he clung to, meant nothing. All that mattered was Caleb. A voice called out from the end of the underpass. It was Caleb. The pressure on Leo vanished instantly. Ryan looked at him with a final before walking to meet his brother. Caleb wanted to know what he was doing. Ryan explained that this was the person who had been bullying him, and that he was teaching him a lesson so no one would dare to again. But Caleb walked right past him, stopping in front of Leo's miserable form. He looked down at him, his face unreadable, before turning to Ryan and asking exactly how he had been taught a lesson. The living terror who had just brutalized Leo was now meek as a lamb, muttering that he'd just been scolding him. Caleb bent down and took Leo's broken hand, his touch surprisingly gentle. He told Ryan to leave Leo to him. If he wanted to vent Caleb's anger, then he should let Leo follow him and be at his disposal. Ryan refused, questioning the wisdom of an alpha being near him. But Caleb just looked at his brother, his blue eyes wide and imploring, and asked if Ryan wouldn't be there to protect him. Ryan caved. Leo tried to protest, to say he was going home, but Ryan pulled him to his feet, whispering in his ear a promise of further pain if he made Caleb unhappy. He followed them not to a mansion, but to an abandoned industrial loft by the river. It was a vast, dusty space where they had clearly been squatting. This, he realized, was why they were so close. Two abandoned sons of a wealthy man, left to fend for themselves. He was deposited in a small storage room with a rusty cot. The pain in his body was a dull, throbbing roar, and he collapsed, welcoming unconsciousness. He woke in the middle of the night, burning with fever. A voice from the darkness startled him. It was Caleb. He said he was afraid Leo would die in silence. He was cleaning and bandaging Leo's wounds, his movements light and careful. In the dim light filtering through the grimy window, he looked almost ethereal. Leo heard himself ask if Caleb hated him. Caleb didn't answer. As the fever raged, a faint scent of rain and ozone began to fill the small room. Leo fought against the instinct, but his body was a traitor. Caleb, still unaware, continued tending to him until the pheromones became too strong. He swayed, his eyes widening in confusion before he fell forward, collapsing softly against Leo. Primal instinct took over. Leo's mouth found his, kissing him with a desperate, fever-driven intensity. Caleb's eyes were filled with the same panic as before, but this time it was different. Weakened by the fever, the day's trauma, and the pheromonal chaos, Leo's own glands softened. He fainted, saved from the humiliation of his own body's utter betrayal. Just before he lost consciousness, he thought he saw a flicker of disappointment in Caleb's eyes. It must have been a hallucination. The next day began with Ryan kicking his cot. He was ordered to make breakfast shredded chicken porridge, to be precise. Leo was about to tell him where to shove it when Ryan mentioned a salary. A number so large Leo had never seen that much money in his life. He was no longer a beast, but a beast with a checkbook. He cooked the porridge. After the meal, Caleb timidly suggested that Leo could transfer to his school and be his bodyguard. Ryan scoffed at the idea of an E-class alpha protecting anyone. But then, surprisingly, he changed his mind. He declared that starting today, Leo would train with him in pheromone control and academics to get him up to par. The next 3 months were a blur of grueling training, cooking, and cleaning. Caleb helped him secretly when he could. Finally, Ryan deemed him ready. He arranged the transfer to Northwood Preparatory Academy and even gave him vials of synthesized high-level pheromones to mask his own. But the night before his first day, Ryan cornered him. There was one last task. A terrible premonition bloomed in Leo's chest. Ryan's intent was clear. He was going to repay Leo in kind for everything he had done to Caleb. The S-class Enigma pheromone flooded the room. The scent didn't trigger aggression in Leo as an Omega's would, but something else entirely. A passionate heat that was supposed to be exclusive to Omegas. His body, his pathetic E-class body, betrayed him completely. He didn't need to be forced. He clung to Ryan, his mind a soup of desperate need, begging for help from a discomfort he couldn't name. Ryan's own control seemed strained, the veins on his arms standing out as he held Leo. Then he moved. Their mouths clashed, a battle without levels, two animals fighting for dominance. Ryan's hand clamped down on the gland at the back of his neck, and then sharp teeth pierced the skin. A torrent of terrifyingly potent pheromones flooded Leo's system, and the world went white. Ryan's voice was a soft murmur in his ear, explaining that the temporary Enigma mark would protect him at the school, that no one would dare bully him now. The fear and resistance he'd felt before melted away into a strange, shocking sense of pleasure. Northwood Prep was another world, a place of manicured lawns and entitled teenagers. It was nothing like Rustwater Alley. The inhibitors and synthetic pheromones worked. For a while, he was invisible, until a physical fitness test in gym class left him utterly depleted. His control slipped, and his true scent, weak as it was, leaked out. 2 classmates offered to help him to the nurse's office. He had been away from the alley for too long. He'd forgotten how to be cautious. They dragged him into the locker room. They laughed about him being an Enigma's plaything. They spoke of modifying him, of turning him into an Omega. He struggled, but it was useless. His wrist was rubbed raw against their grip. He heard one of them say not to kill him before they'd had their fun. Then a blinding pain, and the sound of a blade slicing through flesh. Blood gushed from the back of his neck. Their laughter was the same as the laughter of the predators in the alley. But this time, no one was coming to save him. The space where his gland had been felt hollow, but a strange energy began to course through his veins, gathering and intensifying. His body was tearing itself apart and rebuilding from the inside out. He didn't know what was happening, only that his pheromones were suddenly pure and heavy, a weapon that could crush everything in its path. A riot of instinct and power exploded from him. He fought blindly, joyously, until the peak passed, and the pain came rushing back in. Through the haze, he smelled Ryan's pine and steel, and heard Caleb's screaming curses he didn't know the boy knew, telling someone not to hit him, to get him to a hospital. A strong pair of arms lifted him. He was being saved. For the first time in his life, he felt like he mattered. He awoke in a hospital bed, his limbs restrained. Ryan was watching him. Caleb was asleep on a nearby sofa. Ryan met his gaze, asking how he felt. Leo had only one question. What had he differentiated into? A flicker of disappointment crossed Caleb's face as he woke. It was Ryan who answered, his voice flat. He had become an S-class alpha. The emotional surge was so powerful it set off the heart monitor. Ryan barked at him to calm down, explaining that because the differentiation had been so violent and unsupported, his body was severely damaged. He might be the world's first disabled S-Class Alpha. The thought terrified him into stillness. Caleb came over, reassuring him that the doctors said he would recover with time and practice. A new panic seized him, the medical bills. He had no money. Ryan cut him off, telling him to consider it an advance. He could work it off. He had earned it. When Caleb expressed his wish for Leo to continue staying with them, Leo didn't refuse. The level upgrade was a chance to rewrite his fate, and this was the best way to earn the money to do it. But the job was becoming impossible. The brothers seemed to delight in tormenting him with contradictory demands. One wanted the AC at 65, the other at 80. One demanded spicy food, the other couldn't tolerate it. It was better than picking through trash in Rustwater Alley, but only just. Then, a call came from a number he didn't recognize. It was Hal. He could hear the fake tears in his father's voice, the slurred words about being at death's door. Hal whined about needing money for a burial plot. Leo laughed, a harsh, angry sound. He asked his father if he remembered that his own mother didn't have a cemetery, that her ashes were buried in the dirt patch behind their old apartment. He hung up the phone, his body trembling with a rage that was old and deep. Hal had never cared about anyone but himself, yet he always seemed to drift through life untouched. When Leo was a child,